presentation. We could do that presentation, but it would take me a lot longer. So let's get the right presentation up there. Okay, are you seeing update on the state-led market study?
Yes, yes. And why don't you introduce yourself? And I'm very thankful you're here to educate us.
Right. Well, thanks, Vicki, and thanks for having me. My name is Caitlin Leotiris. I'm a principal at Energy Strategies, which is a consulting firm. I'm here today to give you an update on the state-led market study, which I'll explain in a little bit more detail as we go through these slides. Wanted to provide you all with a little bit of a background on this study, kind of how it originated, and then also give you a update on the results that have been presented to the public to date. That will focus primarily on the 2020 study year, because those are the results that, again, have been presented publicly. And I've also tailored these slides to focus a little bit more on the RTO, Regional Transmission Organization, results, and also to give you an update on Arizona's specific benefits from the results that we have to date. And then I will also provide the next steps in this study process and encourage you all who may be interested in learning more about this study and seeing the additional results that are yet to come to participate in the stakeholder process. I will send, Vicki, I'll send you these slides after this call, because there is a link that you can navigate to be added to the stakeholder distribution list for this effort if you're not already on it.
Great.
Right. So the state-led market study that I'm going to provide an update on for you today was made possible through a grant from the Department of Energy. I think all of the participants that have been part of this study are very thankful to DOE for providing that grant. The history of why this grant was initially sought really started a number of years ago. If you recall, back at 3 or 4 years ago, there were several competing, perhaps, proposals in the West to create different market constructs and configurations. There was the potential for CAISO to expand and PacifiCorp to join the CAISO. There was also a proposal from the Mountain West Transmission Group for a number of utilities in the Colorado, kind of Wyoming region to join the Southwest Power Pool. There was even discussion about creating a new market with PJM and Peak Reliability, the reliability coordinator at the time. So there were a lot of potential market developments out there. And there were a number of states that had an interest in assessing those different markets and doing so from a kind of neutral party and a neutral forum, not looking at these market proposals from either a utility or market provider that was trying to push them. So that was the origination of this study, was an interest from states and understanding those different market options. The study definitely evolved as the market options in the West evolved over time and has transitioned to really be focusing more on generic market constructs and not so much on a specific market provider or market proposal that might be out there. This study is administered by the staff at the Utah Governor's Office of Energy Development, but there is participation from 11 states in the West. You can kind of see the 11 participating states there on the map in the bottom corner, bottom right-hand corner, that is. And each of those states can have 2 members participate on the lead team for this effort. The lead team is the entity that is responsible for guiding the study, making decisions. And so we have 2 members from each state that can join. This is, just for your reference, the list of current lead team members for each state. There may need to be some updating to this. There have been a number of changes with the new year. But this is the slate as it stands now. The group works to make decisions through consensus, and to date has made all of their decisions through consensus, but there is an option to take a formal vote if that's necessary, and has not been necessary to date, and don't expect it to be. So the study overall has a number of different components. Today, we're mostly going to talk about the quantitative piece of this study, but there are several elements of it. There's a quantitative assessment and then also a qualitative assessment. So the quantitative assessment of market benefits is really focused on operational and capacity saving benefits that could result from different market constructs. And that assessment looks at two different timeframes, 2020 and 2030. Again, the 2020 draft results were presented to stakeholders in October of last year and are publicly available. The 2030 studies are underway and will be presented later this year. The study also includes a qualitative piece, which is called the Market and Regulatory Review. That piece of the work will culminate with what are called market factor scorecards. These are really just tools that will be available for states to use in assessing how different market constructs might help in advancing the following interests. There are 3 different scorecards that will be produced, one for each of these potential areas of interest by states. So the first is increased use of clean energy technology. Second is reliable, affordable provision of energy. And then the third is the retention of state regulatory authority on key jurisdictional elements. The results of both the quantitative and qualitative piece of this work will be put into a roadmap, which is the term that's used in the grant, but really will look a lot like a report that will provide states with the kind of tools and information to help them assess future market options that may come before them. So I mentioned that the study is focused on generic market constructs or market options that might be out there and not on specific providers or specific market proposals that may be being discussed. The 3 market constructs that will be studied when everything is complete include a real-time market, a day-ahead market, and an RTO. The lead team helped identify these different market constructs for analysis and then also helped define and inform the market characteristics that we should assume apply to each of these market constructs. So these are, again, the 3 market constructs that will be studied when the final study is out. In addition to those kind of market types or market constructs, the lead team also helped identify a number of different potential market footprints. We've got 4 here on the screen. Status quo. This is really intended to capture the existing markets that are already out there today. So for instance, the 2020 status quo case includes all of the entities that are already participating in the California ISO's Energy Imbalance Market, or EIM. And that really allows us to look at the incremental benefits of changing the footprint or changing the market construct. So that's what the status quo footprint is about. The one market footprint obviously covers the entire West. And then there are 2 different 2 market footprints, which are just potential market footprints that could theoretically arise. That 2 market A obviously has California kind of as an island and the rest of the West surrounding them in their own market. 2 market B has most of the West in one market, but the kind of Colorado, Wyoming area in its own market. The 2 market A and 2 market B footprints are really only going to be studied in the 2030 timeframe. So today, I'm really just talking to you about the status quo and comparing the status quo to some one market footprints. We are not studying, as part of the study effort, every single combination of timeframes, market constructs, and market footprints, but have selected a subset of those combinations to assess. And this combination is really intended to allow the study results to answer some questions that the lead team put together and wants this study to help answer. So we're going to talk again today about the 2020 studies and results. 2020 has kind of the benchmark case, the status quo real-time only, which is intended to capture what is happening in the West today, and then looks at what might happen if that real-time market footprint expanded to cover the entire West. And then additionally, that the 2020 study looks at what would happen if there had been an RTO in existence in the West that covered the entire West, so it's the one market footprint. So these are the studies that were presented in the October 2020 stakeholder meeting and that we'll look at briefly today. The study looks at some market benefits and costs and puts those in the benefits into state by state calculations. Here at the bottom of this slide, you can see there are a number of benefits and costs and considerations that are not quantified. Some of them will be touched on in the qualitative piece of the study, the market and regulatory review. But in terms of actual quantification, the benefits that are quantified in this study include production cost savings. And we're looking really here, the metric here is adjusted production cost, which is similar to net power costs. Also looking at capacity savings that may result from an RTO forming or another market construct. So this is reduced capital investment due to load diversity and non-coincident peaks across the footprint. Those benefits are calculated on a balancing authority by balancing authority basis, but the states wanted to see these results in terms of the benefits to states. And so we have taken the balancing authority by balancing authority benefits and morphed them into state by state calculations. And really all this does is, if there's a balancing authority that covers part of Arizona and part of New Mexico, the benefits for that balancing authority are allocated to Arizona and New Mexico based on their load ratio share within that balancing authority area. So the results that you'll see that I'm going to flip to now for the one market RTO case are presented on a state by state basis. So this here shows you the market benefits that would have resulted if we had an RTO in place in the West last year that covered the entire Western interconnection. The amount of benefits that this study estimates would have accrued across the West is about $1.3 billion for that 2020 year. Those benefits are about 1/3 capacity savings and 2/3 adjusted production cost savings. And you can see, if you look at the top right graph here, that shows the dollar amounts of benefits to each individual state. And you can see that California, Washington, and Arizona do quite well, but other states also see significant benefits. When we take those gross dollars of benefits and normalize them into dollars per megawatt hour or cents per kilowatt hour, we see things kind of get a little bit more evenly distributed across the states. And looking at it on a dollar per megawatt hour or cent per kilowatt hour basis, Arizona does quite well, just right behind Washington there. We'll talk a little bit more about Arizona's benefits in just a minute. The key observations from the 2020 studies that we've performed so far are that there are measurable gross benefits for most states, both from expanding the real-time energy market to the full West and from moving into an RTO configuration. The amount of benefits for an RTO are significantly more than expanding the real-time energy market, about 10 times more across the West. We also see, as I mentioned on the previous slide, that individual states, when you normalize for load, the benefits are fairly consistent in terms of order of magnitude. They're not equal, certainly, but they are fairly consistent. We also see a lot more interstate trade that occurs with market formation. I think that's probably intuitive. In the 2020 timeframe, we did see the emissions across the West would go down slightly, a little bit less than 1%, but still a measurable emissions reduction, mostly due to running more efficient generators. We did not see a major impact to renewable energy curtailments in the 2020 studies as a result of creating a market. I think that will probably be different when we get to 2030 and there's a much higher penetration of renewables in the portfolios that are assessed. So since I'm talking to the Arizona Independent Scheduling Administrator, I thought it would be helpful just to dive in just a little bit on Arizona's benefits from these preliminary 2020 studies. So what we saw for Arizona is that if the EIM, or a real-time energy market, was expanded from its current footprint to the entire Western interconnection, Arizona would benefit on the order of about $42 million per year. That is primarily driven by increased revenues to Arizona from higher exports. So Arizona is generating a lot more, selling to its neighbors and reaping the benefits from higher revenues. When moving from that real-time market to an RTO market, Arizona sees benefits of about $210 million per year. So about 5 times higher than just expanding the real-time energy market. A good portion of Arizona's benefits in the RTO case come from the same thing I talked about with the real-time market expansion, really generating additional power and selling that, exporting that to other states and receiving higher revenues as a result. Arizona's savings in the RTO case are not significantly driven. They're about 20% from capacity savings due to having a non-coincident peak that's slightly, or a coincident peak that's slightly different than the rest of the West. We see in the Northwest, for instance, that the kind of percentage of capacity savings is much higher for those entities because their time of non-coincident peak is much different than the West as a whole. So when we look at the RTO case for Arizona, that $210 million in benefits translates into roughly 0.3 cents per kilowatt hour reduction in costs for Arizona if there had been an RTO in place last year. So with that's a summary of kind of where things stand to date. There are a number of upcoming meetings and ways to participate if you're interested. We anticipate, although it is not scheduled yet, probably won't get on the calendar until the end of this month, but we anticipate there will be a stakeholder meeting in February. That stakeholder meeting will likely include a draft review of the market and regulatory review. So that will likely be part of that February stakeholder meeting. Additionally, we will likely be presenting some draft 2030 study results to stakeholders at that time. There will likely be another stakeholder meeting this spring, potentially in May. That will probably be the final stakeholder meeting where the final report and results are unveiled and the project is wrapped up and finalized. So certainly encourage your participation and feedback during those meetings. We also accept written comments, usually for about 2 weeks after the meetings. And this is the link here that I indicated. I'll send Vicki this slide deck so you can, you don't have to memorize that terrible link there. And you can add your name to the project's stakeholder distribution list if you want to be notified of those upcoming stakeholder meetings and provided with materials when they become publicly available. So Vicki, with that's all I wanted to cover today. I'll turn it back to you.
Well, thank you, Caitlin. And I'm sure there's a question or two from the group. Anybody will open it up.
Caitlin, this is Scott Olson with Direct Energy. Thanks very much for the presentation. And it's quite interesting. When the California ISO was first looking to expand to include Pacificor, one of the big sticking points was who pays for transmission costs. California's TAC is so much higher than every other state, it really led to a balking of a lot of, a lot of balancing authorities to have to share in what the California ISO's TAC costs are. How did you guys handle in this study how transmission would get paid, both existing and new transmission? Did that get equally spread? Was it just kept the same as it is today, or was there some hybrid like was proposed when they first initially talked about merging together?
Thanks, Scott, for that question. That is a very sticky issue, and was one of the areas that the states actually did not want to do additional analysis at this point in time. I think there was a general guiding principle that was given to Energy Strategies as the project contractor early on to not repeat or duplicate work that had already been done. And some of the specific examples that were given were governance and transmission cost allocation. So that's a long way of saying that the study really did not analyze what might happen with transmission cost shifts and cost allocation for new or existing transmission.
Okay, so when you say 200 and whatever it was, $203 million saving to Arizona, that assumes that Arizona customers would pay exact same transmission rates they do today. There'd be no increase due to any new cost allocations.
I think that's a fine way to characterize it. You could also say these are gross benefits, right? So
got it.
Or any cost shifts or costs associated with creating a market operator or expanding an existing market operator's footprint.
Great. Thank you.
And Caitlin, I might have missed it, but it's been long standing that the governance issue has been of concern to Arizonans and I think other state commissions. How was that addressed, the governance?
It was not addressed. Governance is not specifically addressed or analyzed. Maybe the place that it comes into play most is in the qualitative work that I mentioned, the market and regulatory review. There is a scorecard that will be produced that deals with kind of a state's ability to retain authority over certain things. That's not exactly the governance issue you're talking about, obviously, but I think it comes into play a little bit there. But this effort is not focused specifically on governance options or solving the governance problem.
And I don't know if you can address this or not, but in one of the past AZISA meetings, we had John Wellinghoff, former FERC commissioner, come and speak with us. And as a consultant now, his opinion was that while initially the California governance process would have some authority in selecting who the board of directors were, et cetera, that FERC ultimately would require fairness in a RTO larger than California, and that we were being over concerned about that. I don't know if you can opine or not.
Sounds reasonable to me, but I'm not going to opine further beyond that, former Chairman Wellinghoff.
Any other questions before Caitlin goes and stops screen sharing with us?
Yep, I have one. Hi, Caitlin. Thank you for this presentation. It was very interesting. I have just a couple of questions. One, maybe just some clarification on the adjusted production costs. Is that mainly the variable costs that go into generation, or what does that encompass?
Yes, that is mainly the variable costs of operating the system. So production costs in general and production cost modeling are focused on those variable costs. And then adjusted production costs really is just trying to take into account, your production costs in Arizona, for instance, in all of these studies went up significantly, but that's because you're running generation more. So adjusted production cost adjusts for the revenues that you get from selling or the costs that you pay for purchasing.
And just a clarifying question on Arizona in particular, because you mentioned that went up in the study for Arizona, mainly because of the ability to export. So you would run generators for the purpose of export in that. Okay. And just my last question is, in terms of resource mix for the 2030 scenarios, were you considering that they were relatively the same as they were in 2020?
No, they're much different.
Okay.
The 2030 resource portfolios are based on plans in integrated resource plans submitted by utilities and are designed to meet all of the individual state clean energy policies that exist in the West. So we'll see a significantly higher number of renewable generators in those cases, and also a number of coal plant retirements.
Okay, thank you so much.
Welcome.
I've got a question, Vicki. I would like to see this presentation given to the Arizona Corporation Commission, and my question was, has it been given previously or recently?
Well, what I can commit to is just splicing the recording, since Caitlin gave permission earlier, and sharing it with the policy aides. But yeah, I don't know if Caitlin's the right one or who might be willing to do a Zoom with the commission, but it's not a bad idea.
And Vicki, I'll just mention, we've had ACC commissioners on the lead team in the past, so they've been involved to some extent, but I don't think that gets quite to the heart of the question. Just wanted to at least mention that.
Well, and also, unfortunately, that was Steve Olea and Bob Burns, who have now left.
Oh.
And I don't know how much of that knowledge among the many issues the commission deals with was shared with the other commissioners. So
Vicki,
we're starting over.
This
Go
is
ahead.
Steve Olea is still there. He is somewhat of a, he's in the hearing division, I think, and he's an advisor to all commissioners, kind of like an A-team person. So he's
Oh,
at the commission.
I did not know that. Huh.
But Vicki, what might be a good idea is to tie this information with a presentation on big data, advanced analytics, machine learning, and artificial intelligence, tie them together rationally and coherently to show how the T&D systems are evolving rapidly, and tie it with this information, because I would suggest that these estimates of value from an RTO are conservative and do not anticipate the value that machine learning and artificial intelligence, when put with big data, can bring to the entire system. And also it's clearly causing the system to decentralize. So it's just a thought.
And maybe we throw this back to Leland and Eric. I know quite a while back when both companies were considering joining the EIM, they did a estimate of cost and benefits. And again, erring on the side of conservatism, I think that the actual results have been higher. But I don't know if there's been any requests to look at making the T&D grid smarter. Gentlemen, Leland and Eric?
Well, I would argue that information's out there for more than one person, and they'll be utilizing it to make it smarter. And that'll be occurring from multiple parties.
Well, I just don't know if the commission has had any proceedings or filings or anything like that, or not.
Not one-off type workshops that I'm aware of, but it is something that, in terms of the intelligence on the grid and smart devices, there's modernization going on of the grid as technology moves forward. But it's not to the point where you might think it is yet. I mean, it's much more advanced than it used to be. And, but we got over 4,500 data requests in our rate case, retail rate case, and a number of questions we're thinking, we have this big data Rubik's Cube that we can twist and spit out an answer without any effort. And it just doesn't work that easily, because you've got multiple systems that aren't necessarily centralized and don't talk. And, your T&D system is not commingled with the transmission system, for example. It's different computer systems that are operating both of those.
I'd probably disagree with that statement. I think that there's many parties out there who are able already to take data and crunch it, a combination of machine learning and advanced artificial intelligence, and glean information which will help make the system more stable and move pricing to a much more efficient level. It can be done from a centralized perspective, but it's being done already out on the edges of the system right now. So I think that information could be capitalized, and maybe the commission should be aware that those technological capabilities already exist and are being
We don't
utilized.
know where the data sources are, Doug. You know, they're not coming from our system. Our system's not interfacing and providing data to third parties. So I'd have to